The idea of a video game where you have to assassinate someone to take them out silently, without being seen, without being detected, isn't really that new in video games. It dates back around to the time of the old Wolfenstein game, Castle Wolfenstein, the really old one, and it was perfected by games such as Metal Gear. But these games had one thing in common. Your objective wasn't to stalk and kill a single person. Usually you were there to infiltrate an enemy base and take it out because you were the hero, or because you had to defeat some big bad evil guy, or you just had to escape. And then you had games like Thief, where you just stole stuff for most of the time. But then Hitman came along. Developed in the year 2000 by a Danish studio named Interactive, this was a game that brought something new to the table. Namely, it brought a focus on the actual idea of assassination, of being an assassin paid to take out one person. But most of all, not to do it by sheer force. So sure, you could try and just muscle your way through the enemy's guards, and while you could succeed, and there were some missions that more or less had you do that, the ones at the jungle I mean, at its heart, Hitman was always part of two genres of games. One was a stealth game, the kind where you didn't always hide by hiding, or not in the traditional sense. You hid in plain sight. You would wear the clothes of your enemies and masquerade as them because, as some of the games pointed out, sometimes people don't see the person, just the uniform. Though if you hanged around people who wore the same uniform, they would notice you weren't one of them eventually. You also had to hide bodies if you killed people or just knocked them out, and in general, traverse the levels as quietly as you could without causing too much commotion and leaving traces behind. You were, after all, an assassin. You didn't have just one mission. You had a lot of missions all over the world, and eventually people would catch up to you if you left trails behind. Well, they never did. The closest to this mechanic was probably in Blood Money, where you could just pay people off to hide your tracks, which was a bit disappointing. The stealth was just one part of Hitman. The other one, well, you probably think it's gonna be something like a shooter because, well, honestly, a lot of the first game did revolve around shooting. You had to snipe people from tall buildings and then run away. You had to do a lot of stuff that wasn't really all that stealthy, which is why some of the best missions in the first game were the ones where you had to infiltrate a place that wasn't a hostile enemy camp. It was a hotel filled with other people that weren't there to be killed, that weren't hostile, where you had to blend in and just make your move quietly without anyone noticing. That's where the game shined because, and this is where the second part comes in, Hitman is a puzzle game. The best kind of puzzle game, the kind that doesn't have one solution, the kind that offers you enough tools and enough game mechanics to achieve your objective exactly the way you want it, the way you feel like you want to play. You want to be extra stealthy? Go for it. You want to be big, bad and violent? Sure, go for it, though that's not really what the game is about, which was something the movie people should have picked up on, but they didn't. But if you wanted to be the kind of person that doesn't use a gun, doesn't carry any sort of weapons on them, just sets up accidents for his targets, well, you could do that partially in the first game, a bit more in the second, somewhat about the same in the third, and a lot in the fourth game. Not that much in the fifth because it was mostly about running away from the cops. The Hitman series had a very linear evolution up to a point. In the year 2000, Codename 47 put you in the role of an assassin, a clone named, well, 47, or Tobias Reaper as he sometimes calls himself, as a fake name, not a real name. You are a genetically engineered assassin, one with perfect reflexes and basically superhuman endurance. I mean, the guy could take several bullets before dying. Most people die from one, apart from that guy in the first game that was so high on drugs that you had to basically kill him with a couple of grenades. Or maybe a Molotov cocktail. I kind of forget if they were in the first game because, well, the items from the first game mostly remind me of the menu system which was required to equip them, which was a bit convoluted. Not necessarily bad, but required a few extra steps when compared to the later ones. Silent Assassin, the second game in 2002, improved on that a lot. It made the controls better, it added chloroform which allowed you to subdue enemies without killing them in case you wanted to be a peaceful assassin. It had a story of revenge and redemption and all these tiny little details, like, for example, an enemy could hear you if you stepped over some chips. In most games it would have to be broken glass or something, but no, potato chips, because that's what you'd find in the room of a programmer which you had to kill, and his twin, or one of them at least. Kill them both to be sure. The third one retook some ideas from the first game, including some missions from it, and basically tried to improve the ideas of it even more in 2004. But the peak was reached in 2006 with Hitman Blood Money. Why? Because this game did its best to have mostly every mission take place in a social environment, one where you are not in any way in the middle of an enemy encampment. One level had so many NPCs that you just had no idea how your PC could run it, because there was a sea of characters just marching through a street side by side, numbering in the hundreds, and this on systems which were a lot weaker than what we have today, and ran flawlessly, which is something that can't really be said for the new Hitman that just released today. Besides having a lot of environments where you felt like an actual assassin that was there to kill someone that wasn't expecting you, instead of, well, you know, some guy in a ninja fortress. I mean, you had to infiltrate a suburban home, an opera house, an eyes wide shut party. Besides that, it also improved heavily on the playability of the game, the interface, the controls. They were the best the series had ever had. Quick, fast, intuitive, basically flawless. And probably until I play more of the new game, I still consider this to be the best one in the series. Because, well, Absolution had some issues. One of them being that you spend most of the game being hunted. You weren't an assassin anymore, you were on the run. And it didn't actually feel like a Hitman game in terms of the story, because while Hitman was inspired by Hong Kong assassin movies, this one seemed to be inspired by something made up by either Robert Rodriguez or Quentin Tarantino. It just didn't fit, it didn't feel right. That this globe-trotting assassin, this master of assassination, would basically be dumb enough to try and strangle someone whose neck had about the same diameter as, I'd say, the planet Pluto in a cinematic, which then derailed the story. But it did have some good concepts, like the contract system, where you could take any mission, any map, and just add random contracts there. People to kill, ways to kill them, and share them with your friends. And from that probably spawned the idea of making the new Hitman game one that's, well, one, episodic, and two, more focused around online missions where you get new objectives periodically, some having unique challenges that you may never actually face again. And I'll be taking a close look at the new Hitman game tomorrow in a new show which we have not named yet. Until then, I'd suggest you give the old Hitman games a look. Though the first may be a bit rough to play, they get better because every 2 years they released a new one. They constantly iterated until they managed to make the perfect one, Hitman Blood Money. You can just try that one because basically it takes everything that was good from the previous games and makes it better. Which is why honestly I was a bit disappointed that in 6 years they only managed to make a game that was okay with Absolution. Here's hoping that the new Hitman is better. If you enjoyed this show, hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Or, if you thought it was horrible, then share it with your enemies and make them suffer. We shall be your weapon of vengeance. But if you liked what you saw, you could, I don't know, maybe donate, because basically YouTube is horrible at revenue, by using the link in the description, or just buy my book. It's a fantasy book about, well, a lot of stuff. I guarantee it won't suck, and if it does suck, you can find me here and complain about it. Unlike some game developers, Ubisoft, I'll actually listen to your feedback.